Running.
Alright, so far what we've done to get where we are, we're just ready to take off the lower cover. We've loosened some various bolts across the top of this harness. We've taken this bracket off. It sits in here like so. We've got a connector on the top that slides off. We've got our knock sensor and our crank position sensor wires that are also connecting there. Here's our knock sensor. It's going to be the gray one. Crank position sensor is lost. Crank position sensor is the triangle one. It's black. You can tell it goes all the way down. There's one bolt that secures it to the lower cover, which is way down here on the side. Now, with our two plastic covers we have removed, the front was just 10mm bolts. There was, I think, maybe 3 that held that on. The rear had 10mm on the tops, but towards the back side, a little lower, was held on with a couple of 12mm heads. So that one will throw you a little bit at first. So we have that out of the way, loose, so we can pull the covers out. We've loosened the power steering reservoir bottle. 2 bolts right here. I think those were 10mm, 12s.
12.
Yeah, 12mm for those. And once they are loose, we're able to get us enough movement room in here where we're able to get the covers out and the engine mount. The low side of the mount has 4 bolts that secure it in the side of the engine. They're all 14mm. On the top we had, what's that, 17?
Yeah.
17mm for 2 nuts and a bolt that goes down through. That's what holds that on. But what sits on top of it, you've all seen, is this ugly black mass. So the 2 studs stick up through here. This is that bolt that comes through, bolts into the lower piece. There's a bracket that runs from here to the top of the engine on the intake manifold location. That's this funny little bracket. A lot of you guys will see that. A lot of you guys will see this bracket whenever you go to change out for a stiffy. You'll be playing with that. So we have one ground strap on this. We took it loose from the body, so that's one less thing dangling in our work area. And then 3 bolts holding this down to the body. Also 14mm bolts. Those are actually pretty easy to get loose. Some of these engine mount bolts are a little bit more difficult with dirt and everything all over the threads. You might try cleaning them, or just use a breaker bar.
You mentioned removing the underside.
Yeah. So down here we started off with our alternator tensioner installed. It's got this 14mm nut and the pulley. In order to get it loose, get the tension off, we got a bolt on the bottom side. If we loosen this, it'll draw the bolt down, give us more room, and this will actually adjust then. Then you can get it out of the way, pull the belt off. That is our longer medium-sized belt. It'll be on the front side of the crank pulley. It's going to go from the crank pulley to the AC compressor to the alternator. And that's all 3 things that it runs. And inversely on the back side, we've got our tensioner for the power steering. This little guy goes up in here. It was kind of in our way, so we decided to pull it out. It seems like it's going to be easier to pull that lower cover off out of the way, but it works the same as the front tensioner. Loosen the lower bolt, you'll be able to adjust it then. 14mm nut. It's this little pulley, smaller in size. So, looking at our kits, we've got a new alternator pulley. I don't believe the kit sells you a new power steering pulley, but we'll check on that later. Now, we just taken off our crank pulley. This has a tooth. It's got a little slotted notch in there. That is our timing mark. That's going to be our top dead center identifier. It has these two holes and the crankshaft bolt running through it, which is wherever we set that. It's got a real thick washer in the bolt. It's a 22 millimeter, and it's got a hole for a locator pin that's on the gear on the end of the crankshaft. Now, in order to get this off, we had to go make a special tool. Now, this is mine and Rob's creation. We took this basically 1/4 inch thick steel bar we got at a local hardware store. I assume you'd probably be able to get this from Tractor Supply, anywhere you guys can think of to get a piece of metal like this. Just flat, really rigid, sturdy. We drilled 2 holes for grade 8 bolts so they won't bend, stretch, get destroyed when we're pulling on it. A couple of nuts to secure it. We used 3/8 bolts because it seemed to fit perfectly into the holes of the pulley. And it doesn't matter, coarse thread, fine thread, whatever you want, as long as you can put it together and get it to stay on here. This wound up being 3 3/4 of an inch gap, and this had to be cut out as our section for our crankshaft pulley bolt. And just make sure it's big enough for your socket to go into and that it'll line straight up with the pulley bolt. So once this goes in, we slid it down towards the engine side, pushed all the belts back, fished it down in, kind of wiggled it in place, and lined it up with our 2 bolts. So this way you can't turn the pulley. So as you're trying to break off this bolt, which sucks, took me and Rob, 2 full-grown men, prying on this thing to get this to break loose. Now, the person holding it doesn't have to apply too much pressure. We've got a whole lot of length on this. You've seen it's from the top side of the engine. It's something that anybody could really help you hold that in place.
That's why I held it.
That's why we had Rob hold it. So the other poor soul has to be on the ground if you're doing this on jack stands, prying with a breaker bar, which mine is a good roughly 2.5 to 3 feet in length, nowhere near the length of the holding brace bar. But we will have this out for loaner for anybody who decides they want to take on their 60K service themselves. And definitely going to be lending this to Rob. He's past due on his. And look for us in Club 4G. I'm on there seldomly, but I do check in. If you send me a private message, I will get an email on that. My username on there is Wingo171, and then you can also reach me on C4G Nation, and same username there. And if you need this, we can ship it out to you guys. It should fit in a flat rate box, so it's like $6 shipping roughly. We'll have to figure out how many people are interested in this and how much money we can get back on our investment on this. It's cost roughly $30 in our area to make, not including the tools. It took us a good half an hour to cut this up, several drill attachments, several air tools, grinders, various tools to cut this thick metal in the contour that we needed without sacrificing too much rigidity. So
Patent spending.
that's good. That's quick and dirty to get where we're currently at. We're about ready to pull off the timing cover, but another note to make on these is that once we do get that crank pulley bolt broke loose, that's the last point in time you have to line your marks up to get you back to top dead center before you take that pulley off. Once the pulley's off, no more chances of moving it. You have to line your timing marks up first.
Show them the marks on the.
On each of the camshafts, we've got a little painted mark on our tooth, and we've got a groove, a little notch cut out on the top of our cover here. That's a metal plate that's bolted between the heads. That's what it's on the front one. The rear one is a casting in the head. It's got a groove notch slot made for it. Again, another painted mark on the camshaft. That's your top dead center indicators for your top two cylinders, cylinder heads. On the bottom side, like we showed about the crank pulley, it just has that notch cut into the crankshaft pulley, and there's identifiers, timing marks in plastic on the top, on the lower cover, the top side of the crank pulley. So you'll see 20, 10, and a T. Line it up with the T where that gash is in the back side of the pulley. You'll be at top dead center as long as all three of those locations are up. And so what we'll do from here is we'll take that lower cover off. We'll start stripping the belt off. We're also going to do the water pump pulley in this too. So we've yet to take our coolant out. So we'll just do a run through with that also when we get to that point.